you graduated, you came here to school. Share us a little bit of your history.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think Kurian did a good job on the first day kind of explaining my story. But I'm a product of a mixed marriage. So my father was Indian-Indonesian. So we have a lot of Chinese Indonesians in the room, but there's actually a small group of Indian Indonesians in Indonesia. And my mother was Irish-Swedish from the northeast part of the United States. And my dad was doing business in New York City. Met my mom, had me there. Then we moved back to Indonesia when I was a baby because my dad was sort of building up the apparel business.
Yeah.
And,
Henny, do you need her to hold on to it? All right.
yeah, sure. Is this better? Yeah. Oh, you want me to? Okay. You want to hear me? Okay. So, so I grew up in Indonesia and had an amazing childhood. If you have not been to Indonesia, highly recommend. It's an amazing place. Go Indo. So I had a great childhood, and then 98 hit. It was a little bit of a tumultuous time, not just for the country, but also for my family. And so my mom, my brother, and I all moved back to the States. At that time, I don't know how I really made sense of it at that time, but afterwards, I felt the pain of having a family that was kind of split. My parents were still officially together, but it was a hard time.
Yeah.
And then my father passed away when I was in high school.
Okay.
So I kind of continued on my senior year, pretended like nothing happened.
Yeah.
I did all the varsity sports stuff and tried to just fit in, basically.
Yeah.
Then I applied to Tufts and had an amazing time there.
Yeah.
Went to New York City, worked at Lehman Brothers.
Yeah. At Tufts, what was your major at Tufts?
Engineering.
Okay. What kind of engineering?
Mechanical.
And you graduated. What were you hoping to do when you graduated from college?
So about 2 years into the engineering program, I realized that I probably didn't want to be an engineer.
Okay.
But I couldn't think of anything else that I'd rather major in. So I continued with it. I did a minor in entrepreneurial leadership, so that gave me a little flavor for business. And I realized that I liked solving people problems and organizational problems more than I liked solving machinery problems or mechanical problems.
Yeah.
So that's why Wall Street sounded good. New York City always seemed like an incredible place to live. And so, and honestly, I just wanted to prove myself.
Yeah.
I wanted to prove to myself and to my family that I could do it, that I could make it. And it was the best paying job at that time that you could get as an undergrad, just graduating. So that was a big part of my own ego.
When you interviewed for that job, did they say, well, why are you here? Because you're a mechanical engineer? Or how'd you explain?
Yeah, funny enough, at that time, they were all about diversity. So they wanted a diversity of majors. They wanted a diversity of men, women, and if you weren't white, that was also an added bonus. So all of that was actually in my favor.
Yeah. And what was it was quite an adventure in New York as well, too. I mean, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I remember I first interned there in 2007. So that was really the height of Wall Street in many ways during that decade, and all the banks that their stock prices were at high highs, and the culture was just amazing. I mean, as an undergrad, you're getting wined and dined, and it just seems like an incredible place to work, and everybody wants to mentor you and pour into you. And I was like, this is amazing. And so throughout 2008, I sort of saw Bear Stearns kind of disappear, and some of my friends had to find new jobs. And then Lehman started to tick downwards, and we all didn't really understand what was happening. And then one day I remember coming home from a run in Central Park, and all of my roommates, they were all working at Lehman Brothers, and they were glued to the TV, and they were like, it's filing for bankruptcy? Like, what is happening? So we didn't know what to do the next day, so we all went to the office, boxed up our stuff, whatever, women will keep their shoes under their desk, right? So we grabbed our shoes and then went home, but we still went to the office the next day, and we heard that Barclays was maybe taking it over, and we didn't really know anything that first day, and then the second day they finally announced it. And so the next 2 years were really quite low, actually. Not just, it was a low period for the industry, for that company specifically, for all the people who worked there, because many of them lost their jobs. But also for me individually, I really, really struggled because it was sort of all my dreams and everything that I thought I had built for myself just disappeared.
Now, Marissa, where was your faith at that point in time? Were you growing in the Lord, or it was just starting?
So it's funny how God works. So I grew up in a Christian home in a way because my mom was quite faithful, and she taught me about Jesus from when I was 4 years old. So I remember accepting the Lord when I was 4. But it took a long time to kind of understand all the aspects of what it looks like to walk with God. And so during college, I've really struggled with two main areas. One was who I dated. I kind of just wanted to date whoever. But then the other area was where I worked and why I worked.
Sherry, you have thoughts? No.
So I remember in the beginning of senior year, I finally said to God, you can't have all of these areas.
Yeah,
and it wasn't immediately that he started taking stuff away, but after that process, he took away the great job. He didn't take it away, but he dashed away all the dreams that I thought, everything I thought it wasn't.
Yeah.
And then the person that I was dating at the time, also that relationship fell apart. And so it was a time where I think after committing finally everything to God, he was showing me that, okay, if I take everything away, what do you have left, Marissa?
Got it.
I still remember crossing the street of Fifth Avenue. It's like 7 a.m. and it's super dark on a January morning. And I just remember thinking, God, if I accidentally got hit by a bus, I don't know, like, I think that might be okay. And so I remember like feeling like, wow, that's a weird thought to have. But then realizing, what, the only thing I'm really living for now is God.
Yeah.
And he's the only thing that matters. He's the only thing that I really need. And so it was quite a low time, but in many ways it was a time I think I really needed, because God needed to show me that if he took everything away, which he actually hadn't, I still had a great mom. I still had my health in many ways. And, but he really started to teach me those lessons that, he is really what is worth living for, not the money or the good job or anything like that. So.
Got it. How did Jared play in the picture? It was during this New York time, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So so the other part of my New York experience was going to Redeemer, where I met Catherine Leary and David Kim, and I did
and even before I met you, Marissa, Catherine Leary also would say, hey, Tommy, you got to meet this person, Marissa. You just got to meet this person. I got to know, I heard about Marissa before we even met each other officially.
Yeah. So they, in many ways really mentored me, and that church really taught us about this idea of faith and work. And this idea that work was created good, and, what does it look like to be part of creating culture and stewarding culture, stewarding the resources that we have for God's glory. So that was a really formative time, and really I started to understand what the gospel meant. And so that was a really powerful time. And through the small groups that were there, that's how I met Jared. And so we had, I just finished the Gotham Fellowship, and I still remember all there were 3 or 4 small groups that had multiplied, and they were kind of coming back together for a reunion for a ski trip. And so it was a bunch of, I've told this story a few times, but a bunch of 20, 30-year-olds, and then I invited my mom to come.
Okay.
Because she had just had a surgery. She hadn't been out of the house for a month. And so I said, Mom, come along. And she was kind of reluctant, but it was great because she got to grill Jared, basically, and figure out what he was about, from the very first day that I met him as well. So it was wonderful, and she liked him and approved. So
good. Very
so
good.
It worked out.
Marissa, at what point did you realize, okay, it's time to move back home and then work for the family business? How did that come about?
So I was telling some other people that joining the business was it felt a little bit accidental. Like I didn't really know what I was doing. And in many ways, I was running away from Wall Street. I was so burnt out after the 2 years that I was there, and was just looking for anything else to do. I applied for Teach for America because I wanted something that was meaningful. I didn't want to work with a bunch of rich people. I wanted to do something where I got to interact with people from other socioeconomic levels. And so I remember when my uncle came to town one day, he said, Marissa, why don't you represent us in New York? Why don't you see if we should start a New York office? So I spent a few months in different customers' offices and really got to know their systems. And at the end of that, it turned out that we didn't need a New York office. So I was a little bit like, okay, well, what do I do? And then we had a little bit of a family crisis within the business that affected both the business and the family. And my uncle said at that time, will you come spend a few months in Indonesia? So I was like, okay. I mean, if I can serve God and I can honor him, then I'm going to go do it. And I remember thinking that I was doing it for God. I was doing something noble. And I still remember a few years later, after kind of just really struggling there for the first couple of years, just circling my apartment building. I think it was midnight, and I was just circling and praying and just like really frustrated with God, feeling like, man, why am I in this situation? I hate this, can't do anything. And I remember him saying, Marissa, you thought you were coming here to Indonesia to serve me and to help me, but actually I brought you here so I could help you and I could help grow you and sanctify you. And so that's really what the journey has been about. And many days I kind of pinch myself because it's, I work in a management team of all men. I'm sort of like, okay, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be here. And my dad's no longer living, so it's sort of like this weird thing where I'm not necessarily the closest person to the chairman now. But I still have an influence, and so a lot of like what I think about is, what am I supposed to do with this platform coming off of the last talk? What am I supposed to do with this? And that's something that I'm working through, and I'm grateful for this group of people too to help think through that.
And honestly, at such a young age, you're like a co-CEO now. And for some of you guys, I know the Indonesians know what your company does. For some, what does your company do?
So we basically are the manufacturers for a lot of U.S. brands.
Yeah.
We make clothing for Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein. The shirt that Jared's making, that wearing, is something that we've made. So basically, so that's what we do. We manufacture for brands. So we'll buy fabric, we'll buy the buttons, we'll buy the labels, and we'll assemble it and then ship it out.
Yeah, and I was amazed. How many employees do you have in your company?
So we actually have approximately 28,000 employees. 90% of them are women.
Yeah.
So it is quite, it's quite a responsibility. Sometimes it's overwhelming if you think about it in those terms, but it is quite an honor.
Yes, at such a young age, she's managing 28,000 employees. I have a hard time managing 3 or 4 employees. So, I mean, very, very impressive. How do you like, for instance, what is your leadership style in terms of managing such a big company?
It's interesting because we have a lot of professionals, so we have a lot of people at multiple levels. So people who are on the factory floors, people who are sort of levels up, and there are many, many levels basically of people who are they understand industrial engineering, they understand the technical side of how to make a garment, they understand how to negotiate with the customer on pricing. So there are a lot of people who really know a lot of that stuff. So the value that I try to add, or the role that I play is what is our strategy, what is our vision?
Yeah.
How do we take this 30-year legacy of this company's existence and the strength that we've built, and how do we take that forward for the next 30 years? Because I do think that manufacturing, every business that we run, how we've done it for the last 30 years is not necessarily going to work for the next 30 years. My leadership style, I think, is very more of a collaborative system, because I'm definitely not the oldest or the smartest person in the room, so I can't just be like, this is what I think we should do. It's a lot of spending time with people, asking questions, asking what they think, and then kind of coming to a consensus around, what direction we should take.
Yeah. 2 last question. Was that hard for the existing culture? Because a lot of times it's probably top down. How have you had to work and wrestle through that and help people buy off on the culture?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think people really appreciate being heard, and they appreciate being validated. So a lot of what I've learned from other Christians, or even in church, of just loving people and caring for people, can be really powerful.
Yeah.
So especially so not all of our factories make money, actually. As a family-run business, we can take a view and say, okay, even though this business has not made money for the last 10 years, we're still going to run it because it employs a few thousand people and it makes good product. And so we're going to try to run it without losing too much money, but it's actually not making money. So when you deal with the managers who are there, it can be hard. It can be a hard conversation because they're making those decisions. And so when you say, okay, well, these are the losses that we've had, or these are the reasons that we've had those losses, and when they speak to it, what is the response? What is the right response? And so what I'm starting to learn to do is just to say, listen, I know that this is where we've been, but I believe that you are the person who is smart enough and capable enough to figure out, how do we solve this?
Yeah.
What can we do differently? How do we learn from the mistakes that we've made and walk differently?
Got it.
And there's a lot to me that really comes from the gospel. That really comes from what Jesus has taught us.
Yeah.
And so even without saying or quoting Bible passages, how do I start to reflect the gospel in how I deal with people?
Yeah. Last question, and we're going to wrap up. You're busy. I mean, not only are you running a company, well, you help me out with a lot of different things, but you're getting an MBA. What else are you up to these days? Marriage is very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's part of doing that. I'm doing a part-time MBA, and part of it was because when our CEO stepped down a couple of years ago, we weren't prepared.
Yeah.
And we didn't have an adequate successor. So my role is supposed to be an interim role, actually, but I realized I don't know what I'm doing. So I needed a community, a group of people that could help me figure that out, both from a Christian perspective as well as from a business and being equipped perspective. But I think a lot of what I try to do and what we try to do is just to really integrate family life, work life, spiritual life, and to do all of that together. So for example, this week while we're here, we're doing this, and then we're going to stop through a couple other cities, have some business meetings, surprise my brother for his birthday, see my mom. So we try to, within 1 week, try to integrate all of those things that we care about and make time accordingly.
Got it. Marissa, thank you. Let's give her a hand.